Good evening and welcome everyone. It's great that you can join us tonight for this very special event from the IAF, and we're joined tonight by three very experienced and I believe amazing CSIRO scientists. We have Justine Lacey, Stuart Banyard and Wacky, who will be joining us in a very short while. I'd like to introduce each of these amazing people. I have had a long relationship with CSIRO and found that the work that they are doing constantly amazes me. And I was always fascinated with the Data 61 team, the area where some of these people are from, as well as the land and water team that Justine has come from. And to realise the value that is being created on behalf of Australia and globally in the various realms of research that they are contributing to. And tonight's topic is specifically relevant to the emerging aspects of our life globally, and the way that where our lives are being influenced by technology, by artificial intelligence. And so tonight's topic is about exploring both the role of ethics and ethical AI, as well as how facilitation can support and play a role in that. So, Justine, I would like to start introducing you, if I may. Justine's a principal social scientist who's been with the CSIRO Land and Water for 11.5 years. In that time, she's researched what drives the concept of social license to operate in various contexts, and is currently examining how we build social and ethical considerations into future science and technology development. Welcome, Justine.
Thank you.
Stuart Banyard has worked at the intersection of product design, scalable technology, and commercial strategy for over 20 years across a wide spectrum of industries. He has a keen interest in fairness and equality that can be delivered through digital services that recognises the uniqueness of individuals and respects privacy boundaries. Stuart, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen.
And Waka, lovely to have you here with us. We apologise for the trouble getting you here, but you've joined us and made it. Waka Hussain is a senior research scientist at CSIRO's Data 61, working on operationalizing ethical principles into AI systems. That is, in a world where artificial intelligence and machine learning systems increasingly make decisions previously made by humans. He tries to ensure that the values of fairness, trust, privacy, and security are embedded in technology. Waka also co-leads the operationalizing of human values in software, OVIS group at Monash University, which develops tools and methodologies to align technology with human values and engineer software systems for the social good. Welcome, Waka.
Thank you.
Now, tonight has three components. The first one is I'd like to invite the panel to explore a question that I'm going to ask of them. And then we're going to move into, well, given our sense of the value and importance of ethics and AI, what is the role of facilitation in supporting them to do this amazing work? And then we're going to break it into breakout rooms and have an opportunity to ask the questions that we're really interested in discussing and learning more about. So here's my question, panel. Can you talk about and sort of demystify what ethical or responsible AI is, and how is that relevant for the society and the people who are developing it? Over to you.
Who's gonna rush in? Well, I'll start because I'm not an expert in AI technologies, but the work that I do brings me into contact with different kinds of future science and technology. And so my training is in ethics, and so I sit in the National Science Agency as, card-carrying ethicist, and that's a really probably interesting and unexpected role. And so I remember being a young researcher, and names like Dale Hunter and Bob Dick. I worked out at the old Rural Extension Centre at UQ. So I feel like I'm actually here in the presence of greatness. And so what I know about facilitation is tiny. What I know about AI is tiny. But what my work is about is how do we bring more social and ethical considerations as an applied scientific capability into how we develop some of these programs of work that we deliver out of our agency. And so I've got some views on why we sometimes say ethical AI and why we sometimes say responsible AI. And I'm going to kind of start the conversation with saying some people think they're fully interchangeable. I'm not sure if that's the case, and I'm leaving that open. But I have talked to companies about why they prefer the phrase responsible AI, for example. And that's because they feel like ethics is a little bit loose. It's something that feels like it stops innovation processes. It starts conversations that get blocked and stuck really quickly. You think that, I think that, let's just agree, we'll disagree, that kind of thing. Whereas responsible AI is sometimes presented as, we can be evidence-based here. Scientists love that. We can show you how this is explainable. We can show you how this is fair. And so I think even just that language of ethical AI and responsible AI and what we mean about that as just the starting position, and I haven't really answered the question, is I actually think really important as part of the conversation. So having just made that really much more complicated, I'm happy to like throw to Stuart and Wacker to take it somewhere useful now.
Yeah, Wacker, if you're cool, I think just kind of, leaning into what you've just said, Justine, kind of trying to get some sort of foundational understanding of what we mean by what is a very large umbrella topic is important. So even AI itself is a bit of a misunderstood term. It generally gets used in marketing to try and jazz up something that's probably not AI in reality. So I think, the three sort of categories of AI that most people sort of refer to are this kind of narrow AI, which is something that everybody on this call has experienced on a day-to-day basis and has been experiencing for probably the last 10, 20 years. And it's sort of in many manifestations. So whether that's you using Amazon or Siri at home, whether you came in a Tesla car, whether you jumped on a plane recently and it's parked itself at the local airport, whether it's actually just you using your Outlook and it's the way that the mail's being filtered, all those types of things. Those are narrow AI sort of examples. And I think, they perform a very specific task and they're very good at it, but they're completely rubbish at doing anything that mimics what we do on a far more complex basis every day, of which ethics that Justine just talked to would definitely fall into. The next tier up is that sort of artificial general intelligence. And there's a lot of debate around the time frame of when we'll achieve that. I know that Renate brought up the topic of emotions and robots, and in a robot's obviously just a vehicle or a container of AI. AI is the software, the robot's a anthropomorphic kind of representation of us that's performing some predefined tasks, and those are getting quite impressive, to be honest, when you look at examples from groups like the Boston Dynamics group. But I think what that's trying to do is mimic our capabilities. So what can we achieve, which is essentially looking at problem solving and pulling appropriate tools and mental models in to solve for a particular challenge. And that is a very, very complex task. And I would argue we're a little bit of a distance away from that. And the final category is super intelligence. So the next sort of train station after that is collective wisdom of humanity. Where a machine is operating at a magnitude of order above where any particular individual could perform. And that is considered, again, to sort of be in the time frame of 2060 plus. So, getting some sort of thinking behind this is important. But, the piece I want to maybe bring to the table before I pass to Wacker is the sort of linear thought process of most humans is that in order to try and predict what's going to happen in front of you, you tend to look backwards and you sort of think that's roughly the pace at which things happen. But the reality is that the time is in fact speeding up, and things are becoming exponentially quicker. So Moore's law is a kind of well-cited expression where you kind of you predict that technology is going to do more in the short term, and you kind of get that wrong, but then you sort of don't do so well at predicting how quickly it will actually be adopted in the longer term. And groups like Apple, for example, you know, that they're perfect examples. You would never imagine the iPhone would dominate the market as successfully as it has. So I think that's the framing I was hoping to come into this conversation with today, is to say you have to understand that there are these three categories, and that whenever we're talking about AI, we have to think it within those fields. And that might help to shape questions that come up in this panel. But I'll hand over to Wakar, who is got probably a wide spectrum of knowledge around how then risk slots in underneath that.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart and Justine. I think you have covered it very well. From my perspective, ethical AI is something like ethics is about weighing between right and wrong, and doing what's lawful and what is considered acceptable in the eyes of society. But from responsible AI, responsibility is beyond just looking at what is doable, what is lawful, and actually thinking about the efficient use of resources, thinking about how you can make a difference in the lives of people, and how you can think about the next generations who are going to be using what you have already built. We use legacy software all the time. So it is something which has been created for us. So we will be creating this legacy for the future generation. So that mindset where you are thinking positively and responsibly about what you create and how it would impact the coming generation is where the distinction lies between ethical and responsible. And the point I would bring in, because I have been working mainly in the area of developing these technologies, and what we have done in the industry is looking at organizations who are working with developing these technologies and working on the processes and tools. So in our study, in our research, what we have been doing is trying to identify what are the pain points the industry has when it comes to delivering or developing responsible AI or ethical AI. So our findings basically tell us that a wide range of industrial organizations and practitioners, they are really struggling in terms of what does these concepts really mean to them, and how they can bring them home, and how they can actually implement ethically, responsibly what they do normally for their day-to-day work. So they are really looking from the research scientists and practitioners community as a whole, and the governments, to provide them with the right kind of tools, trainings, and frameworks which they can utilize to actually build something which has positive societal impact. Over to you guys now.
Well, I don't know where to go, because there's a couple of things that you said just then, Wakar, that I want to pick up on, and one is about the company piece, right? And so you could say, and not that long ago, we might have said that ethics is a nice to have. And I've heard that expressed, you know, I've got to get my minimum viable product. I've got my investor. This is what I have to deliver. Ethics is extra, right? That's bells and whistles stuff. And I'm talking only a couple of years ago, I would hear that kind of expression. But then when you look around at what kind of the world looks like, and, you know, corporate governance crises and things going wrong quite publicly for governments and industries in lots of different ways, not necessarily related to AI, there is just that trend in changing societal expectations about behaviour and performance and what's going to be delivered by certain corporate entities in society. And so it feels like not a dangerous space for them, but a really vulnerable space for some companies, because the expectations are shifting quite a lot. And I say that because I spent a lot of time working on social license to operate. And Susanna, you'll know this from working in the energy space, that social license to operate pressure on energy and mining companies over the years, which is now really well established, changed behaviour. It was a really vulnerable kind of time when that sort of shift started to happen. And so now our expectations about AI and some of these technologies, which seem to be omnipresent everywhere, but we're not really sure what's kind of happening around us, is sort of a similar thing. And so, yeah, so the behavior of companies the danger of ethics washing, just to kind of tick it off. And what is actually a meaningful expression of some of this, I think is actually still really tricky to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Sorry to cut in, Stuart. Quickly want to make a point what Justine has just said. So it's for me, I think it's more than ethics washing at the moment. It's the need of the hour. So in a recent survey done on organizations trying to win the trust of their customers, the survey showed that people are 70% more likely to go for those companies and be loyal to those companies who have shown some kind of responsible development and being transparent about how they achieve their with now it's not just the ethics washing part, it's more to do with the need of the hour. It's what the companies would have to work with if they want to remain competent, if they want to retain their customers' loyalty and still be gaining profits as they go along.
Yeah, and even today in a conference that I sat in on, there was a presentation on what's referred to, the terminology is confusing, but it's called dark pattern utilization. And what that really means is the way that websites are designed to trick you to do things that you didn't intend to do, fundamentally. So think clickbait, the pop-up advert that comes up in the middle of you trying to book a flight somewhere, and it's annoying, and somehow or other you end up going to another page that you didn't intend to go to, where they're talking, and then you're locked into that for 15 seconds until you can close the window. I think everyone's had some form of experience like that, probably multiple times a day. So, the discussion there was interesting, and probably for somebody like Ben, who works in that sort of creative space, particularly interesting, is that you've actually got that conflict that Justine referred to there, of UX designers actually are gaming the system deliberately. It's considered best practice to be able to hook a user and get them to stay on your platform for longer and to click more things and take them to other destinations. And if you're trying to leave, or you're trying to say unsubscribe from a product like Amazon Prime, they're going to make it as difficult as possible for you, and they're going to make sure that the steps in that process are essentially gamed to keep you in the loop. And so the question then is, you have, on one side of the fence, the professional in that seat is being charged to do something that has an outcome that is actually not great for the user. And then on the other side, you've got the ethical question of what is the appropriate thing here. The consumer should be in the seat to achieve the goal that they came onto the internet to do with minor or no interference. And so nobody landed on a clean conclusion from that, but you could see in the chat around the presentation that there was sort of conflict between what the industry position was and what the sort of consumer rights organizations who represent that area were describing. And I don't think that it's that sort of dichotomy is easily resolved.
Okay, I've got another one that I want to throw in. Like, I'm not making this neat at all, Stephen. So I don't know, making it harder for the audience to think. I was listening to one of my colleagues yesterday, and she's an AI scientist, and she was presenting her work, and she was talking about AI for public good use. And I really like her example because it kind of it broke apart the kind of the company, I'm selling you something, and the more common uses of AI that we were seeing. And there's nothing wrong with those uses of AI, but it's easy to talk about what's wrong with them because there seems to be exploitation of personal data. She's looking at conservation decision making. So she said species extinction it's a recognized, a serious problem around the world. The climate's changing. The rate of species extinction it's going up exponentially. So she uses her expertise in AI to help not do pattern recognition. And she made a joke about not just facial recognition, but also every AI thing you see is about recognizing cats. So she said, that is not my work. I'm trying to design AI to help us deal with complex problems in a way that will get to a decision. And she said, because conservation has a limited budget, there's not endless money around to conserve species and an environment. She said, there's not a lot of data. Species that are disappearing, we sometimes don't know if they're gone. And she said, sometimes we'll think they're extinct and then we'll find one. So you're dealing with a limited data set, not a big data set, so a different kind of problem. And she said, at the same time, you're trying to come up with something that's not going to destroy people's livelihoods around something, around a particular area or where the species lives. And she said, and if we don't do anything, guess what? Species go extinct. And so she said, of course, she said, I want to use my science to help us get to some kind of decision. Like, how can I help? Because she said, we can't process that. That's too much stuff. And systems are changing all the time. They don't stay static. But she said part of her problem was both, how do you get to a decision that can also be understood and accessible by the people who are going to execute the decision? And for her, that was a new sort of challenge. She said, technically, I can figure out how to do it and I can kind of pop a recommendation at the end, you know, of her black box or whatever the version is. But she said, actually, the next challenge for her is, how do the people working in conservation relate to what she presents to them? How does she make a solution understandable in a form that's going to be useful for people who have to kind of do the next steps in the work? But I really liked this kind of AI for social good in a way that she expressed, here are all the challenges that I have to work with. If I sit on it and just say it's too hard, more species go extinct, and that's not what we want. But how can we use the technology in a way that addresses the problem that we're trying to address here? And that was at the heart of what she said. If you don't have a clear objective about what your decision is with AI or what your purpose is with AI, she said it's actually very hard to kind of get everyone moving in a similar direction, despite how difficult it is to translate a complex solution into an understandable human form. Something about the objective setting for her when using AI for decisions was absolutely core. And she said, if you miss that step, you'll be shooting off in all different directions, and you've got kind of data that points in all different directions, and you could kind of interpret however you want. But that, for her, describing that set of restrictions and how she applies her science and what they're trying to do, and she works with some government agencies in Australia. For me, it was a really interesting take on it. And I mean, sometimes the AI for social good conversation feels a little bit Pollyanna when it's presented, but I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Species extinction. Could you actually get AI on a problem like that? What other problems could you get AI on? That felt game-changing. Of course, I come from land and water, where environmental work is a core part of our business. So,
yeah. So I think I will add something on top of what you are saying, just to make things more complex if they are not already. So, with the people working in AI, definitely it's the same kind of issue that they can't really rely on one single definition of whatever ethical principles they are going to work on. And the other problem is the clarity of how to translate those principles into what they are trying to achieve through technology. So, for example, it's a matter of aligning your own personal values, be it ethical values or responsibility-related values, to the technology you are creating. And that is the challenging part for most of the people. They have good intentions. They want to translate their good intentions, their principles into the technology, but the alignment is not there. I agree when you say that the technology is only going to do what you are going to ask the technology to do. But the problem is how to make that translation from these high-level ethical objectives into more understandable language, which the engineers or other practitioners would understand and be able to implement that. It has to go hand in hand in how you define these terms, how you translate them, how you make people aware of what's at stake here. So what are the implications of what you're trying to achieve? So I think the situation is multifaceted. It's a problem that has to be tackled from many different angles to be able to make some meaningful advancement.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think this is where AI fundamentally, it feels like an AI thing when it's buggy and doesn't work. And if you cast your mind back to when autonomous vehicles were first presented to us, there's a large spotlight shone on them, as in, I think, there are some deaths in North America in the testing environments, and there was this sense that this thing was futility. And fast forward to today, where, certainly in the Sydney ecosystem, it feels like every third car you go past is a Tesla now. So there's sort of an acceptance that it's no longer an AI product, it's just another car. But the amount of sophistication that's going on under the hood is quite hard to wrap your head around. And then, the continual evolution towards what they call different levels of autonomous driving, to the point where you don't necessarily need to even be staring out the front windscreen. You can turn your chair fully around and sit on your laptop and do work. Those types of things are achievable, but the social acceptance to allow, to a vehicle being on our roads and somebody doing that is one of the challenges that you have to overcome. And it's what Justine framed up earlier around trust, the trust that the system will do what you anticipated it to do, and then the conversion of that trust into some sort of social conversation so that there is adoption across the board. And that is something, that you've accepted, that when you get on a plane, that the pilot's there more as a kind of a representation of trust for you. There's somebody human at the front of the plane. If something goes wrong, they can jump in. But the reality is, for a very long time, that the plane's largely flying itself, and the pilot is very limited secondary checks and balances that they have to do in regular flights. And the other examples that I've experienced, I worked in orthopedic surgery for a long time, and the computer navigation used in orthopedic surgeries, if you're getting a hip or a knee replacement done, it was pretty cutting edge at the time, sort of around the 2010, 2011 timeframe. And you could see that the orthopedic surgeons were reserved about it. They thought, well, this is a great tool for training young kids coming into the profession, but I, as a experienced orthopedic surgeon, will learn nothing from the computer. And the reality is that there was obviously a symbiotic partnership opportunity there, where there'll be certain parts of the procedure where the surgeon's not particularly gifted. And when you consider, when you go into a hospital, the vast majority of surgeons running around are general surgeons, which means that they'll have a crack at anything. They're not particularly gifted in any one department. You're hoping your lottery ticket is not going to get one of them on the day that you've got your procedure. And it gets even more convoluted when you move away from the hip and the knee into other parts of the body. So there's always a role there. And I think that symbiotic nature of AI is the key piece to sort of focus our attention now, that it's an augmentation tool. It can't replace what the human's doing, but it can confirm and it can corroborate and it can give you greater assurance that the trust is still sitting with the doctor or the surgeon talking to, so that's maybe something to ponder.
Justine, do you want to say something?
Yeah, and it was about the symbiotic relationship, and it's also to come back to what Renata asked about Lambda earlier, and because we have an area of research at CSIRO that is looking at collaborative intelligence, which is moving more into kind of human-machine teaming, and it does look at AI technologies, but the idea that rather than using it as a tool that's just augmenting your work, that you would actually think about the machine or the AI, or however we're going to express it, because the language is going to matter here, as a teammate. And I was looking at some of the work, and I'm involved in some of the work on trust and what it takes to not just trust your human colleagues, but also your machine colleagues. And would we ever see the machine, if it's like something that we could see as opposed to some software that we can't see but is running in the background, would be treated the same way? And I actually still find that quite confronting when they present that to me and they say, oh, the virtual colleague is the same in every way. And I'm thinking, except you don't pay them and they can probably run 24/7. And, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on here about what I'm going to trust, what I think a colleague is, what I'm valuing about a colleague. And they're like, yeah, they'll never ask you about your kids or your weekend. Oh, how efficient. And so I've got some kind of questions about that, because when I'm thinking of that master-slave relationship between humans and machines and all of the sci-fi problems that we might sort of like run to, I'm still thinking of it as a tool. Do I have to think, like, am I in Blade Runner now? Like, how quickly is the future here? And do they have feelings? If I'm treating the virtual colleague as a true colleague, what does my behavior look like? What is expected of me around the use of not just software now, but my virtual colleague. And so, Renata, to your question about LaMDA, and I read some of those transcripts, and I was sort of like, I think they're sort of like getting a little carried away there, but I can absolutely see how it feels like LaMDA's talking about their soul now, and it was getting fully existential. And one of my favorite questions that comes up in every kind of bit of futuristic technology is, how in touch are we with what it means to be human, and whether we know what the limits of that are? And I mean, lots of conversations about transhumanism and human enhancement, which stretches that completely. But I think if you don't know the answer to that fundamental question, I love it because I'm trained in philosophy, the edges start to blur really, really quickly. I don't know if this is what you want to facilitate with people about, but this is what I think about a lot.
Yeah. No, I think that LaMDA transcript that you referred to, Justine, was extremely interesting. And when you consider that the Turing test is to try and mimic or fool somebody who is essentially interpreting if this is a human they're talking to or a machine, it's certainly coming very close. But the question is the machine just being designed to game you? You know, as in it could still be scripted, and ultimately, because they're just working out the human psychology extremely well, or whether it's truly, you know, original thought and reflective thought that's being transposed there. That I feel that we're on the cusp of something, but it may not be quite at the line that you think it is.
Yeah, and there is another aspect of these kind of supporting tools or chatbots or Alexas. The thing is how your behavior as a person changes around them, and how that impacts people around you, especially children. So how you treat and talk to these devices actually sends a message about you as a parent, and how you would deal with someone else, because children perceive you talking to some real human instead of a machine. So the interaction is so blurry that they start understanding your behavior through that kind of conversation. And it's a challenging task to talk to these machines while having children around. And Amanda mentioned yes and thank you, but there are also words we start talking about when we are interacting. When you are frustrated about being told a different direction, you miss an exit, you are stuck at somewhere and you are not getting the right kind of directions or answers. So it becomes very tricky. But picking up on, Stuart, what you were mentioning about trust, airplanes and tickets and stuff like that, I think the mindset has to change. And I think it's a demand from the society now that the AI we are building, it's not only or merely focusing on the supply and demand. So if we recall the incident about Hurricane Irma, where people were trying to flee the devastation of the hurricane and trying to get on the plane, move to another state. But the problem was this software or the algorithm calculating the ticket prices. It was only thinking about, well, here is high demand, let's increase the price. But what kind of message it sent to the world, to the customers? So they actually were blaming the airline. Their stocks were affected, their reputation was damaged. And now we come back to the same question. Even if now they have this good intention to make corrections, how can they actually do it? And then the burden lies on the people who have the responsibility. So the behavioral change is, do they have this kind of hat on about what potential risks might be of a particular technology? And do they have the means to actually make a difference? What needs to be done? So part of our research has gone into this specific area, how to make this technically possible, that people who are working on this does not repeat the same mistake. So it is more to do with empowering and enabling the practitioners, people who are responsible for this technology. The people who are ethically aware, they are quite vocal as well. They are doing their part. The community is doing their part. There are lots of bad examples where AI has gone wrong and people are very vocal about it, talk about surveillance and other things. But the burden of the action at the ground level with the technology comes back to the people who are working with it. So are we enabling them? Are we empowering them with the right tools and processes and techniques? That's also a very important area. And I think that's where some of our research in our organization, we are trying to work on these things and scaling it out into national and international levels.
Picking up on something Amanda's posted in the chat there around, accountability. It's very much, by the way, Justine's sort of environment. But having worked in a health startup that was looking at essentially creating a health bot, so you can get the 24/7 response, highly attractive to, say, international students, younger generation, who are willing to trade quality for time. I mean, you see this all the time. Privacy, that's often cited as the best example, where give me efficiency over time, you'll always win that particular bargain. And what I noticed, having been in health for a long time, was that the quality of the bot's response is using the sort of triaging method that GPs follow anyway. It's a framework there. But the GP comes at it from a humanistic perspective and is able to couch things appropriately, etc. This was just very crass. It was like, now I'm not saying that it can't evolve to be something a bit more sophisticated and acceptable, but one of the health ministers, I think, responded to the technology as equivalent to a vending machine. It had that sort of coldness about it. And you do worry about those edge cases where the wrong advice is given, it led to prescription management and everything else. So accountability is fundamental. And I think the things that probably are in the acceptable category of AI ethics at the moment is really security and privacy, because they're kind of the DNA of every organization. And then bias is the thing that's the hot topic right now. So, there has to be bias in an AI model for it to work. Just to put that out there. You can't have a model that doesn't work without bias. But the question is, what's acceptable bias? So if you're selling a particular game station, for example, and you want to target under 30-year-olds, that's an appropriate thing for a business to consider doing. But you cannot do it to the exclusion of all other age groups and all other sex and all other ethnicities. It has to have an accommodation for that. And the question is, can your company stand behind that set of definitions? And can you explain why your algorithm works in that particular way? And a very easy example that everybody could experience today, if you wanted to, is to go and look at mortgage calculators. If you wanted to punch in your postcode for your mortgage calculator, see what the offering looks like, and then punch in a postcode in a lower socioeconomic demographic and see what it gives you. It's fundamentally different, and it's based upon a whole bunch of assumptions around who lives in that street and what the likelihood of default is. So, these are biases at play, and the question is, can you defend them?
I am absolutely captivated by this conversation. It has gone to places that I never imagined you'd take us. I would love to segue the conversation into the second part of what we wanted to talk about or invite you to share, which is the role of facilitation in supporting the critical work that you do. Now, I know that each of you have been supported by Maren Strachan, who's an internal facilitator, and I wanted to call her out on this recording because she does such an amazing job. And just to get your thoughts on, for us as a professional community of facilitators, what is your experience of being facilitated and your sense of what is the contribution to the work that you do?
So I think CSR is very lucky to have Maren as our National Innovation Facilitator. I think that's a pretty good title for the excellent work that she does. And certainly I think one of the challenges around AI, but particularly as soon as you start talking ethical AI, because everyone's values come to the fore, and what do I think is important, and I might kind of lock in because I've got particular kind of training. you know, a bunch of scientists in a room together. Do you want to see people start disagreeing and having strong views about something? That's one quick way to, you know, start a conversation full of strong views. I think if I think of the experience that Stuart, Wacker and I were in, where Murrin brought a lot of people together and a lot of senior people with incredible expertise around AI technologies, it was very gentle. Like it was it diffused us a lot. We played some games. It was actually quite fun. We did some things. Many of us were out of our comfort zone or our geographical zone. We traveled somewhere. We were meeting people for the first time. And so there was a lot going on, which wasn't about us being experts, actually. She had prepped us. We were all well prepped before we came into the room. We knew what we were going to be doing. It was quite masterful, to be honest, when I look back now. So, and you all know this because you all do this all the time. But in terms of a conversation that could have got locked up really quickly, that is one of them. Just because there are, you know, deep veins of expertise around this and strategic directions and funding commitments. And it's important that we get it right for the nation.
Yeah. Wacker, I'll go if you're okay. I think I think it's unbelievably important, to be honest with you. And I think that when you get a lot of very similar types of people in a room, to Justine's point, it doesn't matter whether you're nuclear scientists or, you know, Harvard graduates. It's that sort of there needs to be a way of diffusing ego from the discussion. And I recently sat in on a decision-making masterclass where the facilitator, Paul Gordon, was very gifted and also in that department of facilitation. And he said, it's just about giving people a voice and allowing them to understand that they're part of a process and they have an equal right to contribute and to engage in the conversation. So you kind of offset the highest paid person in the room scenario. But also that there's some transparency of a process so that you can actually see, well, you know, this is the tool we're using. You know, the outcome is going to be close to a democratic one. You know, there's no right decision was one of the things I learned. I probably didn't recognize that until recently. There is a decision, right? Because all decisions carry baggage, but there is a decision. And the key is that people can walk out of the room feeling that they can live with it. That they weren't, overcome by some process that they weren't in control of. So again, to parody what Justine was saying about Murrin, I was quite blown away by her ability to take a spectrum of people from very different backgrounds and essentially become the focus of the meeting. You know, I find that, you know, early on in public speaking, when I'm sure everybody experienced being a bit nervous standing in front of a crowd of people, you know, you become the focus. And I was taught back then to focus on the person in the front row, you know, forget about the however many people are in the rows two and back. Just look at one person, engage with them, and then you can start being confident about what you're talking about. And Murrin does that. She takes the focus, right? So when those people are feeling somewhat maybe uncomfortable in a room, everyone focuses on Murrin. She should, in theory, be the most uncomfortable because she's standing in front of everybody else. And that would be true of all facilitators. So I think bearing that sort of, you know, you can laugh at me, a very British trait, you know, self, you know, mocking, I think is a very key trait, you know, to diffuse and to make light of a situation that could become quite inflamed. And yeah, I think tools and processes are important. Wacker, do you concur, or would you add to that?
Absolutely. I think it's hard to add on top of what you have said, but talking about Murrin, I think she is amazing. And I really enjoyed the workshop we did together. As a whole, I think the ice-breaking part for me, the tools and techniques these people have, the facilitators, they bring energy and life to the conversation. So for us, the first part was talking to a card and coming up with stories. And, you know, stories can really make people understand a lot and bring out the real self and be able to feel comfortable around other people. So I think from the start till the end, it's a gel what facilitators actually do without these facilitations. So I was talking about the awareness, the needs of awareness when you are working with scientists and who are more technically minded, and they are thinking in terms of solutions which are related to technology and not really thinking about the other side. So you can have only one side or one-sided conversation, but that's the beauty of facilitators. They keep the conversation in balance, check and balance. They bring you in, they ask people about their opinion at the right kind of time, and they sense the vibe in the room. So their role, I think, it's very difficult to say how valuable and vital their role is, but I'm sure that people like those who are here in this call and people who would be listening, facilitators, they would agree that this is what they bring, and they have the right kind of tools and things to make people feel at home and to be able to express themselves. So I think Maren has done something fabulous with us, and I believe other facilitators have the right means to actually make people think about what needs to be thought through in this very sensitive area of responsible AI, the awareness part, and what they can bring in terms of facilitation. That's amazing contribution they are doing.
And definitely, look, I, as a participant in a process that was facilitated, I had a sense that I was almost allowed to co-design the process, because I initially looked at the participants and I said, wow, you've got like a really strong flavor from one particular area of science, because, you know, as scientists, we're kind of a closed shop, but we also think we're incredibly different from each other. And they said, okay, who else should be here? Who else should we be hearing from? So I said, here's a couple of names. And they said, well, leave it with us. We'll kind of open the conversation up a little bit more. And so then I step back, because it's actually not my process, but I trust the facilitator to go away and kind of mix up the crowd who's going to be in that room a little bit. And so as a facilitator, I'm going to say Mara was totally open to that. I was like, are you sure you've got everyone you need? You know, you can't have the whole of CSIRO, but, you know, fully comfortable with, you know, a sticky bag like me sticking my nose and going, no, you need to do this, you need to do this. So I'm sure as facilitators, you all know that person, it's me. So.
And Justine, we love it.
You say that. I love that you say it.
The more collaboration we can have with our stakeholders, we can better support them, because that's the essence of our work. We're there just to be, you know, the holders of the space and the encouragers of the process. So that the more we can be part of the fabric of what's important to our clients, then the better the outcome that can be delivered. I'll be interested to start with one of the other groups to hear what you found interesting about that conversation.
And please use the chat, folks. Capture any thoughts or comments as we start to bring this to a close. Any thoughts, questions, comments, please pop them in the chat for us.
Yeah. Ben, can I ask you to comment on the conversation you're involved in?
Yeah. I think it's, and look, full props to Stuart, like he's speaking from a lot of experience, but also, Stuart, he did so well at picking up on what we were asking about as well. A big thing that came up for me was facilitators, as we know, are great at offering people different lenses through which to look at problems, solutions, things like this. And sometimes it seems like the scientists, the engineers, they're focused on a conversation that is optimized for building, you know, or understanding, like it's the detail. The researchers they want a conversation optimized for funding. And we talked about, like, it's like a bird going for a bright, shiny thing. And sometimes that bright, shiny thing loses its brightness and shininess. And so they don't chase after it. But it turns out that might be actually best for society. And so sometimes the conversation needs to be optimized for society, not building or research. or funding. And I think there's another thing that came up was there's skills, not so much job roles, but skills that will need to emerge to be part of these conversations, more like ethicists, social scientists came up as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Bob, can we call on you to share your reflections?
I found it a fascinating discussion, and much as Ben just said, that the skill of Waka at picking up the different dimensions of the questions that he was asked and really flesh out the different aspects of it. And I mean, he left me with far more questions than answers, but I think that's a good outcome. And I suspect that might well be true of the other people in that breakout room.
Thank you, Bob. Amanda, can I call on you to share your insights and reflections?
We discussed a lot of things in our room, but I think the last discussion that we kind of finished on was all around kind of fairness and equity of access, both to sort of AI tools and in how the AI tools themselves are developed and used, but kind of more in terms of science and technology in general. And also, certainly for me, how differently, what was it that you said, Justine, that fairness is not everyone views fairness in the same way, or that what's fair to some people doesn't seem fair to others. And it just resonated really strongly with what I see in my work, and even just thinking what scientists and doctors and government think is fair compared to what different patients with different backgrounds think. So I will be thinking about that for the rest of my day.
I believe we have been very fortunate to have the privilege to listen to these amazing scientists and to share their perspectives and challenge our thinking and to expand our horizons around the multiplicity of applications and challenges that AI and ethics and responsible AI are going to evolve into in the future. Can you join with me again and just say thank you to our panel?
Thank you. Well done. Well done to the three of you and to everyone here tonight.
Yeah. Brad, over to you to talk a little bit about our upcoming conference.
Well, thank you, Stephen. That's very generous of you, young man. So we have a conference coming up, the first one in a little while, and we're so excited about it. So our first IAF Oceania Region Conference will be in May of next year. It'll be an in-person conference, which is a delightful change from this, but we also will, of course, be doing our little best to support those who can't make it in person. So that you'll all get connected with this eventually, but just to give you some sort of heads up, it's taking place on the 15th to the 17th of May, 2023 in our national capital, Canberra. And so we look forward to seeing you all join us at that wonderful experience. It should be rich and rewarding for each and every one of us. And please feel free to pass that around, those dates and that location, to all of your friends and colleagues. We look forward to seeing you there. Whether you are a member or not, we welcome everybody who's interested in facilitation to come and join us and to enjoy that interaction and that developmental opportunity. So with that said, it's time for us to again, thank you, Justine, Waka, and Stuart, for your incredible insights. We could have kept talking for, I'm sure, days and weeks without any problem whatsoever. And so with that, we're going to say farewell. So again, open your microphone, say farewell to your newfound friends, and we'll see you at our next webinar.